Okay, welcome, everybody. Welcome. I can't tell you how important it is that that we're doing this. I want to appreciate the people that have been working with me to get this done. Pharaoh, as always, Dwan, Linda, Ryan, Sundiata, Frank, and all of us. So just welcome to everybody that's here. And we'll have other people drifting in, but we'll go ahead and get started. So I want to welcome everybody on behalf of the Racial Justice Collaborative. So Adam, can you put the first slide up? And we'll just move right into our program. We've got a big program here for us today. And here, this is what we're talking about. And remember what I just said. And remember what Ehrlichman said, who was working right along with another president of the United States who was using people to get what he wanted. And it's injustice. We're not a system. We're not built on fairness. We've got all those ideas, but we're not. We're an unfair, unjust, unequal society. And so the injustice today from the harm that comes from the war on drugs. And what we're looking at is, how do we heal the harm? How do we heal the harm of the impacted communities, that the resulting impact in communities by the war on drugs? So let's look at some of the communities. Adam, next slide. Now, when we're talking about disproportionate impact, what does that mean? So let's look at these slides. And the top one, this comes from the ACLU late a 2020 report. That is the data from the 2020 report is 2018. So keep in mind, here in Massachusetts, we legalized cannabis as of 2016, legalized for adult recreational purposes. We were already decriminalized, but now it's legalized. So here, when you look at the data, look at the ones in red in this map of the state of Massachusetts. The ones in red, all counties with racial disparities of, not just plain disparities, not like a little bit. We're talking about above the national average. The national average is 3.84. National average is already almost four times, not percent, 4 times. And so what are we talking about? Racial disparities. That means that if you look to the right and you start looking, we'll break the counties apart. And then you look at the top, Middlesex County, for example, in blue, that's the white rate. And we're talking about arrests, just simple arrests, a marijuana possession arrests. So here we've got 6, almost 7 to 1. The top graph are Black people. So Black people in Middlesex County, where many of us actually live right now, are almost 7 to 1 being arrested for marijuana possession. So we'll talk later on about, I talked to Larry recently and he asked me, why are we still arresting people? So we'll talk about that. But if you look down this list, you'll see in the blue the difference, and in every group, in every category, and this is above the national average. So we're arresting disproportionately. And then if you look down here at the bottom on the left, the rates of Black arrests disproportionately. And then if you look down here at the bottom on the left, the rates of Black arrests compared to white arrests. So if you look at the very bottom, look at 2010 data. So in 2010, the Black arrests were almost 4 times the white arrests. And that was 2010. That was before we had legalization. So here, then the top figures are 2018. Now we're 2 years into legalized. Then all the big numbers, the gross numbers have come down. So there are fewer arrests, but that hasn't changed the disproportionate, the racial disparity at all. In fact, it's gone up. It's gone up. So we still have more Black people being arrested. So just mark that in your minds. This is a problem, a continuing problem. This is, so can we go to the next slide? Can everybody keep their microphone muted? So here, I'm now going to talk a little bit about each one of the people. We're ready to hear from somebody else. So here we have Pharaoh, and Pharaoh, for you, all of you know Pharaoh, because Pharaoh is does a lot of work with bringing us actual facts and information about the bigger picture, the history. And so he's going to do that today. Pharaoh's a member of the Racial Justice Collaborative. He's a founding member, and he's also the co-host of an award-winning TV, radio, and podcast production, Let's Talk About Race. So we're going to hear today from Pharaoh. Next slide. And Sundiata. Sundiata, also a member of the Racial Justice Collaborative. Sundiata, the tail weaver. Most of us have seen Sundiata before. He's written a story today. It's called Dunny and the Cannabis Conundrum. So his story will pull everything together. And Sundiata has a big history in the arts. He's also a teacher. So, and he tells a story of police harassment that was, maybe you'll even tell that today, but he's a teacher. He works with kids. He writes children's books, and he's a hip hop artist. He's the author of our title song, and even Sundiata has stories to tell as a Black man. What does it mean to be Black in the United States of America? Next slide. Now I'm taking you through our presenters today. Here we have Linda Champion. Linda, that's a good name for Linda. Linda is a champion. Linda will really get into the harm, and she knows about it firsthand. Linda is an attorney. She's an opinion columnist, and she's an educator. She's also been a prosecutor, and she's worked in the district courts, and she's worked in a prosecutor prosecuting drug arrest, and she'll tell us about those, and she'll tell us about injustice and the injustice she saw, and some of the things were just too much for her. But she'll also talk about what's that caseload like as a prosecutor. You have so many cases, your justice is nowhere in this at all. There's no room for any justice. She'll also talk about the police and some of the stress they're under. So there's injustice to go around. She's very much involved with boards, the Urban League of Eastern Mass. She knows all about justice for housing. She is a justice warrior. She's a champion for justice. So we're so happy to have Linda, and thank you. Next slide. Linda's one of our panelists. And then Ryan, thank you, Ryan, for being here today. Ryan knows all about the equity programs. And the equity programs are the programs that you'll wanna, you see his email address up here. you'll want to get that email address, because these programs are at a place where it's happening word of mouth. We're also maybe coming out of a pandemic. So there's still ways that you can directly bring people in. You might hear of somebody, they belong in one of these impact groups that I just described, and they are interested in getting some of the economic benefit. They've suffered the harm, now they want to have the benefit. Here's an email address. You can send those email addresses to people that you know, organizations that you know, that are that have people or serve people. Get the email address for masscultivated@gmail.com, so that they can get involved. We're at the ground floor, everybody. And there's money. Sometimes there's no money. That's not the case here. And Dwan will tell us more about exactly how much money there is, because of the injustice. It's not out of the goodness of hearts, but it's because of the injustice that we're going to talk about today. Because of that injustice, there's money, and that money won't heal any more than the cash award that George Floyd's family and his young daughter got. That won't heal, that won't bring him back. But the money will help start to raise our ships so that we're able to have better lives. So we'll have this information. We'll be sending all of this information out. You'll get it all. So right now, there is Ryan and Adam. Next slide. Here we have Dwan, and Dwan is, she's the person that will talk to us about the corporate kind of economic possibility, so that for people who want to be owners, for people, maybe you want to invest, to find out what you need to do to maybe start to bring you into, there are programs that potential owners can get involved with. And so Dwan knows all about that. And Dwan is out in the community on weekends. So maybe Dwan will give me her schedule. And so I can, when I send this out to everybody, I'll send you the schedule so you'll know where Dwan is in the community, and you'll get a chance to go up and meet her. Dwan is the Vice President for Government Relations and Community Investment for Sierra Naturals. And so Sierra Naturals is one of those organizations, big organizations, that is funneling the money that is coming in, that is required. Dwan will pull no punches. She's going to tell you it's required, but it doesn't matter. It's money. Communities need it. So we're going to make sure that that money gets out to everybody that we can help. So, and Linda just put something in the chat. So make sure you get that. Can we have the next slide? And Kathy is monitoring the chat. So if you have any question, or you want to, I can see it right here in front of me, but Kathy, if there's anybody that asks a question, and I want to acknowledge here that we do have some sponsors. We've got, in addition to the Sierra community, we've got the Arts Councils, and we've got the Somerville, Massachusetts Arts Council, the Cultural Councils, the Wellesley Cultural Council, the Wayland Cultural Council, Natick, and the Newton Cultural Council. So there are a lot of people that are wanting to be supportive and to get money out into the community and get information. They're supporting the Racial Justice Collaborative so we can bring information out into the community. So let's move now to the first real presentation. And so Adam, let's bring, before we bring up the last two slides, let's bring up Pharaoh's presentation, his recording, and let's look at the history.
So today we're going to be talking about mass incarceration, the war on drugs, and the massively harmful effect that it's had on particularly minority and especially Black communities. Now, as we move forward in this country, we are seeing the rapid growth and expansion of a cannabis industry, where because of cannabis's existence as a criminal substance for decades in this country's history, there are so many that are in prison as a result of this thing. So we're going to be talking about how we reached that sort of place historically in this country, as well as talking about the healing that can be done in regards to all of those people and all these communities that are adversely affected by something that is now so profitable. So, to get to the beginning of this, we have to discuss the history of policing in the Black community and how criminalization for all sorts of things has led to this. The history of policing in this country traces itself to in the Northeast with the night watchman patrols, which would often watch for violations in Puritan customs, and in the Southeast for slave patrols that would be roving the countryside for any escaped Africans that might have gotten away from plantations. In the 13th Amendment itself, which abolishes slavery in the United States, it does have a specific loophole in which it is stated that slavery is fully and wholly abolished in the United States, except for as punishment for a crime. And states have the authority to lease their prisoners to all sorts of businesses, allowing for the slavery of people in prison to be a very lucrative business. So now we get into how we reached this position to be filled with Black people. And so we have the Black codes historically. At the end of the Civil War, the Black codes were established throughout the South in order to criminalize all sorts of mundane activities for Black people exclusively, including loitering, violation of nonsense curfews, vagrancy, and the like. So now that Black people couldn't be enslaved passively, and you could only be enslaved if you were a prisoner, all sorts of new laws were passed in order to make it so that pushing a Black person into the position of criminal was so much easier to do. The Jim Crow laws are an extension of that, as you had all these new laws created to enforce segregation. And if those were violated, just as with the Black codes, it was just another reason to force Black people into prison where they can be exploited through that loophole in the 13th Amendment. So historically, we can see that as a result of Plessy versus Ferguson, as a result of segregation and the Black codes, the Black community in the United States eventually starts to fight back and fight back hard against these things on a societal level. Brown versus Board of Education represents where this fight was taken on the legal front. This was, of course, a famous, tremendously famous, groundbreaking legal case in which the court decision paved the way for the civil rights movement by making it unconstitutional to have this separate but equal standard that had been established before. That was the groundwork for the entirety of the segregation legal system and legal code. This was how this was fought on the legal front. We, of course, famously have Rosa Parks, the mother of the movement, who was a very strong example of how this, and still the early years, was a situation that was fought on the social front. it feels somewhat redundant to even have to explain early here who she was, but obviously when you have this role model woman, this church-going woman, secretary, it being treated so clearly and brazenly poorly, it was very difficult for anyone, even people that believed in this system, to see this and not have a feeling of injustice to some degree. And then after that, we get into the civil rights movement itself. This is beyond the kindling. This is now the full on raging fire. You have all sorts of marches famously throughout the United States. You have all sorts of new leadership, like obviously Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., like Malcolm X. We have all sorts of fronts and voices and opinions, but all heading towards the single destination, the single direction of seeking justice for those in the Black community that have been denied justice for so long. So after the monumental and groundbreaking success of the Black Civil Rights era and movement, there was, of course, the inevitable backlash from the white community that would be unwilling to so easily accept the changes that were so courageously pushed for. One of the most important parts of this particular form of backlash was a changing of the strategy that was brought to the table now in a post-civil rights era movement. No longer was it as common to be able to just proudly throw slurs that dominated American discussion regarding Black people before, not after the civil rights movement. And so this is where you have the development of the euphemism, where you have code words to discuss things that you are intentionally discussing, but in a way in which masks your bigoted intentions, a strategy which very strongly lives into the modern day. In addition to this, we have the development of the war on drugs. This was the new targeting system. This was the new battering ram that would lead all of the charges as we move towards the modern form of slavery, which is mass incarceration. In regards to the numbers, the war on drugs, particularly with just marijuana charges, and here, just in the state of Massachusetts recently, in 2014, you can see that the arrest rates for Black people over white people is massively farther ahead. We can see that in regards to on the world scale, the United States is leagues ahead of other countries in regards to incarceration rates. And this is because, as we discussed before, the 13th Amendment allows for legal slavery of prisoners, thus making it an incredibly profitable business. It is a truly institutional and self-perpetuating cycle. We have the new form of targeting now that you can't have laws that just specifically target a race via segregation standards. You have your new form of address, you have your new criteria, which is that you are now harshly targeting drug use. You then have the court system, which sends these small time drug related offenders off to prison where they are then legally enslaved. And then through that system, you have mass incarceration. And through the war on drugs, you have a newly legalized and existent form of modern day slavery. So now that we've talked about the history in regards to the foundations of mass incarceration, of the reason why it's profitable, and all of those background facets. We're going to be discussing the potential and the hope for equity, relief, and the healing from the harm that it has caused. So we want to make sure that we are ensuring equity. We have now a flourishing business and industry in regards to cannabis when it has been a criminal offense for decades that has ruined the lives of so many people that were thrown in prison on felony charges for something that is now making others so much money. And it is obviously an issue of great inequity when you have, for decades, so many Black and brown people being thrown into prison. And now, once it's legal, the majority, vast majority, on every scale, from ownership to even being an employee of the industry, being dominated by white people in regards to cannabis. So how can this be healed, and how can we move to have this be more equitable? And it is a collective and concerted effort. It has to be something that's intentionally fought for and something that's intentionally championed. Because currently, incarcerated individuals and those with prior arrests and convictions for a large majority of time are unable to get in on this industry in a meaningful way, even in regards for when it's legal, such as in some locations not having a felony charge within the last 10 years of conviction. That allows you to legally be involved, but even then you still don't have anything that allows you to get involved on the private level. You don't have any of the connections, you might not have any of the capital, when so many of these communities were destroyed by the legal issues relating to this, and now it's doing nothing but continue to work against them, just in a different way. So providing benefit and opportunity to these impacted communities is something of great importance when it comes to talking about this issue of equity. A way in which this can be achieved, and a way in which this needs to be achieved, is through cannabis community investment. It has to be something that the cannabis community does. It has to be something in regards to actively choosing to help those who have been impacted so disproportionately by this issue. It has to be related to fixing and rehabilitating this relationship and this history, to truly do something about helping the victims of this. And it does need to come from the cannabis community and industry itself. So it's important to understand how all of these things are all quite literally still in our current reality. There's all amounts of data and information in regards to how all of these things still bleed into why we need equity in regards to the cannabis industry. We have here just a few of these statistics. We have the number of owners in the cannabis industry is 81% white. Similarly, even just in terms of number of employees that work in the cannabis industry is 71% white. You just see how still in regards to this, you have entire communities and groups that have been devastated by criminalization of this drug for decades, and now as soon as it is legal and, more importantly, profitable, it is entirely and wholly almost dominated by white men.
Okay, thank you, Pharaoh, and thank you, Adam, for moving us along. So let's come right to our next part of the program. Adam, can you put up the Dunny and the cannabis conundrum slide? And I'm going to call on Sundiata. So we're going to come back to this. Remember, we just saw this. We're not going to forget about, we've got people, I mean, they're in jail, even those that aren't in jail or they can't get a job. Where can you get a job with a felony on your record? So this is what we're going to start to talk about now. And Sundiata has created a story about this. So Sundiata.
Peace, all. I've been sitting and listening and really learning. I've had a little bit of problem with my internet, so I hope everything is online now and good. The story that I told, that I came up with was based on what Diane and the rest of the RJC were talking about with this issue, and how cannabis and drugs in general affect our communities, and that it has outreaching effects that touch people who are just linked in with people who are involved or who just live in the community. So Dunny is our character for today, and I chose to speak about Dunny because and make a character from the community that I was raised in, which is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is a part of the greater Boston area. So I wore this hat too, even though I'm not a Bruins fan, but you know. So this is the tale of Dunny and the cannabis conundrum. I'm gonna tell you a story, well known, and I have to read it off. I wrote it this week, so normally I like to tell stories from here, but I'm gonna read you the story because I want you to get some of the details. Let me tell you a story about a well-known tale about that many people live. This is Dunny, a local kid from the greater Boston area. He's from Washington Elms Projects in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Dunny was 16 in the 1990s, where our story begins. His family included his mother, older brother, and much younger sister. There was no father present, as was too common in those times and in so-called African-American households in general. Perhaps as a result of flat out from an onslaught of drugs and crime from outside sources in these communities, or as a kickback from slavery, or even maybe for the fact that many mothers could not get proper assistance from the government if there was a man present. This could always be a factor. Regardless, this was Dunny's reality. The family struggled to make it regularly. His mother worked 2 low-paying jobs. It did not afford the family with much more than bare necessities. The projects that Dunny lived in were like many in the United States. Washington Elms was rent-controlled housing where most of the residents were barely making a living and sometimes lived in abject poverty. Food stamps, pissy hallways, ever-present danger, and government cheese were part of Dunny's reality. And those of you who know about government cheese knows that that's a problem in itself. But the government cheese is a problem from East Coast to West, and it's just something about a commonality and the struggle of being lower income. At 16, Dunny found himself taking care of his household most times as his mother worked constantly, it seemed. His older brother stayed in the street a lot and eventually was locked up for selling crack. Dunny would see about his sister, who was 6 at the time. He did the best he knew to do. They had a steady diet of cereal, hot dogs, Kool-Aid, and chips. The meals of champions. Excuse my sarcasm. But this was, unfortunately, many children's reality. One day, Dunny and his sister came home and their home had been robbed. All their clothes had been taken and their TV and furniture were gone. Dunny's mom was distraught with anger and anxiety. That day, Dunny decided he would have to do something. Eventually, his mother would fall ill due to different complications in her situation. So he decided to make some money. He tried to get a job, but because of his age, he was only able to get a low-paying job at the grocery store. So he got a job at Stop and Shop. He would get off school, take his sister to the cousin's apartment in his complex, and then he would go straight to work until about 8 o'clock. He would pick up his sister and go home. His mother got in at 10:30 every night, grabbed a meal, went to bed, and started the whole thing again the next morning. For some who know Malcolm X, it was a vicious cycle. After a few weeks, Dunny decided he had to do something more to better his family's life. So he decided to sell weed, like many people in his community. He had a friend that lived in Roxbury, a predominantly Black neighborhood in the Boston area. His friend would supply him, and he got his supply from a white kid in East Boston, whose family had ties with the mob in Southie. For those of you who don't know, Boston, there's a lot of mob ties and a lot of other things that go on in Boston underneath what happens in your face. But in the 90s in Boston, marijuana was illegal like many places, and many people went to jail as a result of selling it or possessing it. Dunny decided it was his best way to make money and not destroy his community at the same time, like cocaine, heroin, and crack had done in former years. Dunny began his business out of his building. He was careful not to let his mother know what was going on. He cared about what she thought about him. He was also careful about not bringing two people close to his home for business. Life began to look up for Dunny as he started to make money, and he was very smart. He treated people in the neighborhood well. He never robbed anybody, and he did his business above board. So he started to grow fast. His supplier was reliable, and so was Dunny. Dunny, being intelligent, added a white kid as a worker to sell for him in Malden. He knew that they would buy from him or from their own quicker than they would from him, so he got a representative. He understood racism on certain levels, even at 16 years old. He laid low, and he ran the operation out of Cambridge. Malden made him enough money to buy a car. He would then drive to different neighborhoods to find customers or more representatives. So Dunny replaced the TV and got better furniture. His mother knew something wasn't quite right because he couldn't afford to do that with his job at Stop and Shop, but she was having too many problems to really do deep investigation. And like many women and fathers as well, in the communities where things are happening, sometimes they turn an eye to what happens just because they know survival is at stake. So Dunny bought his sister some clothes that she really needed that fit with no holes in them. He also paid some sisters in the building to braid his sister's hair, which was sorely needed. Life was looking up for the family, even though so-called African Americans were still reeling from the Reagan administration, decimating their median income by 75% in so-called Black households, and the top 10% having their income jump 240%. And I didn't make that up. Dunny and his people have been resilient for centuries, and things were improving. So one day, Dunny was meeting his Dorchester representative, and things would change drastically. A man happened to crash into him. Dunny was carrying a few pounds of weed or marijuana to give it to his workers and knew that this was no good. The man that hit him tried to say that the accident was not his fault and was going to call the police. Dunny knew that the accident was the man's fault, but he pleaded with the man not to call the police because he knew what was at stake. The man was European American, and Dunny knew that wasn't going to look good anyway. So caught, and even though Dunny knew he was right, he offered to pay for the man's damage. The man said, "No, my dental firm will have to report this as it will affect my rates." So as Dunny was trying to reason with the man, knowing the police meant trouble to him, guilty of doing something or innocent, as it is in America. So he was pleading with the man, and then a police car happened to roll up. Dun, dun. Well, seeing what seemed like an altercation, the white officer decided to check Dunny's car, but not the other guy's car, by the way. Of course, the pounds of weed were discovered and Dunny was off to Walpole Penitentiary. Because of the amount of product, systematic racism, and inequity, Dunny received a couple of years in jail as his sentence. Dunny's mom was stunned and hurt and embarrassed, because at that time, people who dealt in that business were considered drug dealers. And things have changed drastically today. But Dunny's sister was the most affected by this set of events. She depended on Dunny for care, protection, love, and attention. That was gone for her just like that. Dunny went to jail, and during his time, he was attacked by a large man trying to rape him. And in self-defense, Dunny wrecked his attacker, lost control, and beat the man to death. The other inmate was European American, and Dunny got more years added to his sentence. His mother went into deeper illness and depression and could no longer take care of the sister, Dana, who was eventually taken into foster care. So all was not well in paradise. A way too common story in so-called Black America. Dunny was labeled a drug dealer and a killer. Years later, and as Dunny was released from prison, he walked the streets in amazement at how people could buy weed at local dispensaries. Like it was a corner store. He had to get a job, so he searched and he searched. But as you can imagine, it was hard for him to get a job with a record. And when murder is on your record, you can imagine. So he didn't know what to do. And having no place to live, he was basically in the street trying to survive the first week out of jail. His mom was in assisted living, but did not want to see him. She blamed him for ruining the family. This was a lot for him to take. One morning, after sleeping in an abandoned car, Dunny went to wash up in a local restaurant bathroom. As he walked in, he was bumped into by a guy coming out. The man was really sorry, and while apologizing, realized he was talking to the same guy he had had an accident with years earlier. It was the same man that he had had that accident with that day when he got arrested. So after he realized that, he told Dunny he was very sorry for being unreasonable then and asked Dunny what had happened after he got arrested. Well, Dunny started to explain that he had been to hell and had just gotten out. The man, whose name was Brian, asked him, why were you locked up so long? Dunny replied, I killed the man surviving hell. Brian felt bad about what had happened. He asked Dunny what was he doing for work. Dunny told him he was having a hard time finding work because of his record. Dunny asked Brian how his dental business was going, because he remembered that all those years earlier. Brian replied, oh, I shut my dental office down a year ago. I now own a marijuana dispensary. Want a job? That's the end of our story. And what it leaves you is the thoughts about what should Dunny do? 2, if he takes the job with Brian, what kind of nonsense is that? He just got out of jail for the same thing. But anyway, I wanted to leave those thoughts. It was just a little short story, made up, but based off of reality. And I appreciate everybody for giving it a listen.
Thank you. So, well, thank you. And thank you for coming. We've had this way of setting up what we're going to talk about here today. And in my mind, I have a plan, but before I jump into my plan, let me just ask if there's anything in the panel as you're like reflecting on what we've talked about so far. What's going on? What do you think? So unmute, panel.
Well, And I'm Dwan Packnett, and first I want to thank you, Diane, for having us here today. This is, for me, working in cannabis, a really important moment, because I believe the most important thing about the cannabis industry and what can be gained from the cannabis industry is having forums like this to let folks in the community know that it even exists. It's got to start there. Most folks don't even realize Dunny's story, but most folks don't even realize that knowledge is power, and you don't realize that you're at the beginning, you're entering a new burgeoning industry, that anything's possible, but you have to get in. And if you have the skills and you can learn the skills, you can take this wherever you'd like to see it go. But I really am glad to be working or be here with Linda Champion and Ryan Dominguez, because I think after hearing the powerful story of Dunny and listening to the history, I think there's a few things about the cannabis industry and how the stigma got attached to it, which makes the job that we have, for me working with Sierra Naturals in the community, trying to get people interested, that they're kind of through with this, or they don't believe it, or it's just hard to reach people. That's kind of where I find myself working in cannabis and where the collective community can be helpful. But I think it would be great if Linda and Ryan kind of talked about some of the people out there, like what happens with the Dunnies when you get the charges and all, and then how we can help folks like me who are in the cannabis industry trying to get people involved, how we can collectively as a community help to bring this out to folks and get them into this industry. And I can then talk more later about what is out there for them.
Great, thanks. I've been waiting to hear Linda. I want to hear from Linda, because I've listened to Linda before, and I am just overwhelmed when I hear her talk about the harm. And Linda, can you, however you want to jump into this, can you just tell us what has happened? What is the harm that's going on for people?
So one of the things that, I would love, first, thank you all for being here and being present. I think this is a very important topic. I feel like everyone should be participating in this conversation, especially after we see Senator Chuck Schumer announce his new Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act. I think a lot of people were asleep when Massachusetts passed their legislation. And I think the legislation continues to fall short. And where it ties into Dunny is this. It falls short because it's offering expungement to people who have nonviolent offenses as it relates to cannabis arrests. And the thing you guys have to remember is, as a prosecutor, it was rare for me to ever see a case where someone was being brought into court and arraigned and the only charge was a possession charge. That's sort of rare. So the smell or the scent of the cannabis is what is the draw, right? So someone could be drunk, they could be, unless they're staggering or slurring their words, if they're 50 feet away from you, you may not notice their level of intoxication. But cannabis is a little unique and different, right? Because you can smell it in the air. And so that can be the draw. And when you have that interaction between someone who might be using and they know that it's not legal at the time, and then you have an officer approaching, what we would often see is that there is another offense that is layered with that is a violent offense. And that's going to be resisting arrest. It's going to be assault and battery on a police officer. And so I don't like the way the legislation is written, because it has to be written in a way that you have expungement, or the expungement request has to be at the discretion of the court. And then someone has to take the time to go back to the original arrest record and review in detail that police report. And so if you see a violent offense with simultaneously with a possession charge, then we might want to really have a different process for how that expungement comes about. But it should still be allowed to then expunge those violent offenses that are connected to the possession, because the reality is The draw was the possession. So I have an issue with how the legislation is coming down. Just as a former prosecutor, I know how those charges come about and how they were arraigned in court. I worked in two of the busiest courts in the Commonwealth, which was Dorchester District Court and Roxbury District Court. As a prosecutor, you know, we had over 200 prosecutors in the Suffolk County area. Me alone, sitting in Dorchester, I had over 200 to 300 active cases at any given time. So as a prosecutor, you don't really have that time that people would think to really figure out and drill down those facts. And so sometimes people say, well, the prosecution works too closely with the police department. Well, but you're relying upon the information that you're given when you're standing up in court to present a case and to determine whether or not this person poses a danger, and whether or not we need to arraign them or whether or not we need to charge them. But the bigger question and the bigger problem that I see, and I don't quite sure know how people are going to fix it. Prison isn't just about like the slavery of a person. You have to understand that a prison system is big business, and and all you have to do is go and look at the system, for example, to know that there are only 3, maybe 4 vendors, for example, that you can buy from that can send something to an inmate in a Texas prison, Amazon being one of them. So my question is, you know, it's not just about getting people incarcerated so that they can then go make your license plate, all right? It's also about pensions for workers, employment for workers, vendors, suppliers, construction. There is a whole industry that is built and relies upon a body filling a bed. And we have to really start to unravel that system. But no matter which way anyone wants to think about it, some people will say that, you know, cannabis is a gateway to, you know, harder narcotics. I disagree. I've never arraigned anyone coming in high on marijuana that was doing anything other than maybe going through a light slow, or they didn't move at the stop sign. You know, I saw the violence coming more so from narcotics or from alcohol. And the other issue is that this sort of war on drugs was more like a pipeline to prison. But then once you created that pipeline to prison for people, particularly young people of color, there was no way out. So I don't understand how there's you repair the harm. There's generations and generations of young people who are lost to a system, because once you start to build that record, there's no way to undo it. And so as a prosecutor, if you come in on a possession of marijuana offense, then you have an assault and battery on a police officer. The next time I see you, you're coming in on possession of marijuana offense, and then there's now there's something else has happened, whether it's you're stealing now to you know, feed your addiction. You're stealing. Why? Because you can't get a job. Why can't you get a job? Because you have a criminal record. So I think we also need to start really looking at and unraveling, why would you guys, or why would we make cannabis legal? Then we put a quarry in an industry. So what does that mean? You want to expunge nonviolent offenses to give people a job? First of all, this is the industry, one of the industries that a quarry should not matter at all. But still, you're subjecting people to that. So I throw that back to the panel. And so we can start to unpack all of the things that we've heard that have trickled down over the years. And all of it stems from economic opportunities for white Americans, and also stems from the suppression of mainly Black men across the board.
Thank you, Linda. We're just all going to jump in here. And then soon after we get kind of started, I'm now speaking to Adam. Adam, we're going to just open this up, because I want everybody here today has something to say. I want to hear from all of us. And so going along with what Linda just said, what came to my heart was a movement. And because Chuck Schumer has put forward a national, you know, let's do this, but a movement. Let's gather up all of these issues and get together and have some power. So let's think about ourselves empowered. Okay, that's my for power. So much for that. Let's get started so we can open this up so everybody can everybody knows stuff. And I want to call on Ryan. Let me call on Ryan, because Ryan, you have the equity programs, and you and I talked about this whole Corey whole thing. It's a shock what's going on. Tell us about it.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback off of what Linda said, Linda hit it right on the head. There are additional barriers right now for people who had been negatively affected by the war on drugs that we are specifically trying to impact, that are preventing them from actually getting into the industry. So as you mentioned, I have a social equity program that we're trying to create here in Massachusetts to really provide benefits to those who had been targeted by the war on drugs through 3 different ways. First, we try to get them that record sealing and expungement. We provide the educational services so that they can get a little bit of a background in cannabis, as well as some professional development training. Then we also provide job opportunities for them at places like Sierra that really want to change the workforce for cannabis. But one of the things that I continue to face with the population we're trying to serve is just what Linda was talking about. There are felonies that are on their record that prevent them from actually getting into the industry. As she mentioned, cannabis isn't always going to be the only charge on the record, whether that be possession or intent to sell. If there is a violent offense or if there's a firearm charge, that automatically prevents them from getting their agent registration card, which allows them to touch the plant. So that would prevent them from working at a retail dispensary or a cultivation facility. So automatically, there's a large part of the population we're trying to serve that can't get in and actually handle the plant. So that's always going to be an issue for us until some of those regulations change. We've thought about different ways that we can get some of these people into the industry by maybe not having them touch the plant specifically. Maybe they can get into jobs, whether that be in a corporate setting, working in like a business and marketing sense, working in IT services, or maybe one of the ancillary business around cannabis where they're not actually touching the plant, but can actually, maybe get hired. But that's still going to be, a huge detriment for a lot of the people we're trying to serve. And as Pharaoh mentioned previously, the people who are really benefiting and profiting from this industry right now are white men. And it really takes, an intentionality by the cannabis dispensaries and cannabis companies themselves to seek out a different workforce, also uplift cannabis, entrepreneurs who want to start their own businesses in this space. So from our end, I think that, we really have to figure out a way to change maybe some of the regulations to, one, get people more into the industry that we're trying to affect. I think I really have a smaller set of a population now that I'm able to positively impact because of those rules. And, in terms of the expungement, I would say that a lot of our legal services are only focused on the record sealing piece because of the fact of, expungement, one, takes a long time for you to be able to actually expunge your record. There's a lot of issues with like the FBI kind of records being a little bit different from what we have here in Massachusetts. So really the things that we've been able to provide up to this point is just record sealing for misdemeanors after 3 years or for felonies after 7 years. But really, if there's going to be a large scale expungement effort, we have to look at ways that we can automatically do that. We've always gotten pushback from, local legislators, agencies that they don't have the technology between different databases to do that. Or, there's some of the things that Linda had talked about in terms of different charges and that kind of thing. But that has to be one of the priorities that we look for kind of moving forward. And, I know we'll get into a little bit more about the program as I try to get people more involved, but I think that's one of the main issues that we have to really discuss kind of within this conversation.
Thank you.
I think it's interesting that, as Ryan said, that people who have a record of doing the exact same thing that they're trying to get into the industry, they're almost like experts. So it's like saying, okay, you've been playing basketball your whole life. Well, I got this basketball team. You sit bench. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that, Sundiata. Like when you think about it, you're not looking at a resume and seeing like what their experience with selling cannabis in the streets were, but that's experience nonetheless. Like you know the product, you know how to upsell if you're trying to work in a retail dispensary and all of these different things, and that should count, you know, for these individuals as well. And that's one of the things that we're trying to change. I think those are the people who we want to promote in social equity programs to be their own business owners and open up their own dispensaries. But one of the things that is always going to be a barrier is, you know, the access to capital. And I think until we can figure out some of those things, it's going to be a lot tougher for these people to, you know, be their own enterprises and that kind of thing.
Right. And then one of the things we need to do is when the legislators are creating these programs that, you know, quite frankly, they sound silly to me. You say you're going to give equity applicants first dibs, but then equity applicants have no shot without capital. So where is the state programs that are going to infuse the capital into these individuals so that they can participate? So what I hear them saying is, we're going to give it to you because we know you can't do it. And you're going to have a date certain to get in the game. And if you can't get in by that date certain, then we're going to just open it up to the people who actually can afford to do it. And so the incentive for us, like with the delivery companies, the incentive for us is to sit back for the next 18 months, watch all the minority applicants fail, give one, you know, that one becomes a token because we got to let one be in there so we can say that, hey, we tried. And then we wait, everyone waits it out. No one invests in anyone else. And then the people who can't afford it jump in month 24. And that's just wrong, right? So the you know, if we're going to have these conversations, like, let's just have real conversations about it. Let's call it what it is. All right. There's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of money involved in incarcerating people. There are a lot of opportunities, and there are a lot more opportunities for you to incarcerate someone than it is for you to change policies so that we're only incarcerating those people who pose a danger to society with respect to serious violent offenses. Even as a prosecutor, I could never understand why I was prosecuting someone who, for example, maybe stole something from CVS, right? Why not let them go to work and make restitution and pay the money that was lost? What good is it if people are incarcerated and it's a financial based crime and they can't work and pay back the victim? And so we really have to start rethinking some of the things that we're doing. And as Ryan said, Ryan's program, unless all of us come together and force the legislators to rethink what they've done, they don't have the manpower or the capacity to line item every single query entry. And that is, I'm telling you, that is what is needed if you're going to do this in a meaningful way, and if you're really going to do harm reduction to an individual life. And so then the question becomes, what is that person's life worth? We've already ruined it, and we probably didn't ruin it when they were incarcerated. We started ruining their lives when we arrested them at 17 for smoking marijuana on a stoop. Because the kid who got arrested in Boston or Cambridge for smoking cannabis on their front porch, another kid in Natick got to go to college. And so you guys, you know, we really got to start having some real conversations, and someone has to start the process of taking the time to help these individuals in a real meaningful way. Right? You got to sit down with them the same way someone sits down with you to clean your credit score. You got to sit down with them. That query becomes their scorecard. And it's what's going to set them up. The neater we can make it, the cleaner we can make it, it's going to set them up for having a better life going forward. Because we cannot get back to them the years lost. But what we can do is help them in a meaningful way, rebuild their life to have a more successful and brighter future. So I don't know what Dwan feels about that. I know Ryan is working in that space, but We just got to have some different conversations. I'm kind of done with the conversations about everyone telling me the bone that they're throwing at everybody. What good is that bone if you can't do anything with it?
So I do have an opinion about this, and thank you, Linda and Ryan. I believe this is kind of in some ways depressing for me because it's like, because it's true. It is really the state of things and how in some ways things aren't being addressed. So I feel at Sierra Naturals where I work, and I feel lucky to be in the position I am in, working with government relations and community investment, and being able to have the opportunity to kind of direct how we would approach community investment. And I feel that these are parallel tracks. I think that you have to have other options of working for yourself to get into the cannabis industry and providing ways to enter into it that aren't the traditional way that was envisioned by the legislation. So one of the things that we've looked at is cannabis as an economic engine, and that if you learn the skill, this is at the beginning, it is just being created, folks. The methods are just being created. The way you do things is just being created. So if you could get into the industry and learn a skill, Sarah happens to also be a union. We're local UFCW local 1445. That gives you a portable job that you can take anywhere in this highly regulated industry. It's not like it changes that much and how they're regulating seed to sale. You can learn the skill. You then can become a partner in a business. You can become the one that understands cannabis. You understand how the inventory system works. You understand the retail store. You understand how the points of sale, where they should be, how the packaging has to be. If you have that knowledge, there aren't that many people at this point that understand how all of this works. And right now, as Pharaoh told us, most of those folks are white men. So if it's just get in, and that's why I'm almost at the point, and Ryan and I were doing this yesterday, of shaking people. Please just see if some job suits you, go in and become a sponge, start there. So at Sarah, what we created was, and I said the hardest part is you can't be what you can't see. Most folks in the community, not only do they not realize that this is this thing out here, this industry, and that even white men are making a lot of money. What they also don't realize is what are the jobs? Because we think of it as I'm a bud tender. You don't realize that there are these grow facilities that are huge, that are usually in more rural areas. Ours is in Milford, for example, that there are manufacturing, production, packaging, IT, inventory, the cultivation, the irrigation, the making the strains, the mother plants, all of that is happening. So to go in one of these jobs and just watch and learn could get you to the point that you're learning the skills. They move fairly quickly up, but you're learning the skills of how it's done. And you can take that wherever you want to take it as states open up. But that's just the first tier. That's just, to me, if you're young and easy, and it's an easier way. It's different when you're a little older. And I would know that more than anyone. And I want to get in the cannabis industry. What do I do? How do I go? Most folks don't realize that there are businesses like Sierra Naturals, which is, on the Canadian Stock Exchange, and there's a 401k. I didn't know that. I came into this, I had no idea that the cannabis industry had corporations, that there are jobs that you can get a lateral job going in for some of the ancillary, the community work, the lawyers, the marketing, the wholesale. There's a bunch of stuff to do. Also things that you could learn if you're going to have your own business. But the fact of the matter is, once you're really working with it, you become a viable person to be a partner in an LLC that can open up their own store, manufacturing. There's a bunch of things that you could do. So it's thinking that if I have the skills, I don't necessarily have to depend on anyone. It's easier for me to raise the capital if I'm the one who knows how to manufacture the plant, or if I know how to grow the plant, or if I know how to run the store or do the inventory in the store, because that's really hard to do. It's not as simple at all as it looks. So what we've done at Sarah, and I just feel that our company And for whatever reason, I just feel lucky to be in this position has allowed, and Linda works with us as the chair of our board of advisors, that they kind of have let us kind of come up with what we think, how you should give back to communities, how Sierra Naturals, and it's part of Air Wellness as well, how we should give back to the community. And we've chosen, and working together, kind of a three-pronged test and working with programs like Ryan. But our test, or our three programs, start with you can't be what you can't see. And that's what Diane was saying. We are out now. This is one of the reasons we're out, to let people know we're here. This is an industry. What can we do to show you what's in the industry and get you interested perhaps of becoming a part of that industry? Also helping parents like Donnie's mother understand what the cannabis industry is, people who would have the stigma, who would be discouraging from you doing that in the community. That is also to get the information to them that this is also real jobs in a real industry. The second part is jobs, and to let them know there are a lot of jobs out there and that you can move through them. But it's also understanding the basic tenets of work. And Ryan and I kind of went through this yesterday, of showing up, being a sponge, being curious and interested, and learning what they're doing. And you then go to the best opportunity. But finally, I think all of that is just training for if you decide that I'd like to do this on my own, or I'd like to form a team on my own. The whole point of this, in our estimation, and Linda and I, we kind of look at it as a funnel, is so that you have the opportunity, if you so choose, to partner, to get in a business of your own, that you may want to take this to what you'd like to do. Now that I understand how it works, I am now financeable, because there are not a lot of people. You'd have to hire someone who actually knows cannabis in a lot of these. So you need, even the folks with the money need someone who understands how to run the business and make it profitable. So that's been this one small thing. I am not saying this is the total answer for all of cannabis. This is one of the things that we've come up with, but it at least begins to address ways to get folks in the community interested in a way where they control their own destiny. And I think that's what the important thing is, that we don't want everyone's a bud tender. I mean, you know, and you don't want the job so split up where I can't learn the business. I'm doing such a small, narrow part of the job that I can't understand how you would actually operate the store. And that, I just want to add one more thing with Ryan, and how that then allows us to kind of work with programs, and we're such a full supporter in all the great work that Ryan's team is doing, of bringing people in. And for example, one of the things we just learned, was while we had been hiring people looking for them to touch the plant, and think about this, Ryan, to touch the plant, what we realized is we needed facilities people. We need people who can do the work on the irrigation systems and work on the air conditioning, because you have to have certain. And there are jobs now that you could be working in Milford at great job, but you're really not touching the plant. You're actually going in and working in facilities. And we just came back and asked Ryan if some folks that we had interviewed, are they still available? Can we bring them in? So that may be in some ways to get around the problem of, I can't get expunged and I can't have a job that touches the plant, but you're still around cannabis and you can see how things work with it. So I'm just going to kind of leave that there and throw that out to people. But this is one program, one company, all of them, especially the large cannabis companies, we have to hold the feet to the fire to participate and to have these things available.
And one of the things I just want to highlight with respect to what Ryan and Dwan are saying, and when we talk about industry, and I can only speak for Massachusetts, remember, when we talk about industry, we're not talking about all the parts of the plant. We only use a portion of that plant and the rest is incinerated. And so the question then is, when Ryan is looking to create opportunities for people to work with cannabis without touching the plant, the next question is, what can be done in terms of research and development to determine what can be used with the other parts of that plant? When you go to other countries, for example, in Haiti, if they're using the sugarcane, there are different parts of the sugarcane process when they're making rum. And there are different variations of it. So what can that cannabis plant do? Is it something like bamboo, where you can take the fibers and extract the fibers from the stem and repurpose those fibers into textile? Where is the research and development? Why are we taking all the other parts of that plant and burning it and throwing it in the trash, versus looking at ways we can create industry so that people can have other kinds of jobs to work in the space?
Let me just one thing, Sundiata, and just one thing. This is a great discussion. There are people here in the audience. Come off your mute. I see Dennis Benson is here.
Hi, Dennis.
Dennis, you can talk about what it really takes to get into this business. I see Jordana's here making a lot of comments. She's going to talk about the legal aspects of things. Nancy is here, and she's going to talk about the whole history of oppression. So if you want to talk, Larry, take off the mute and be prepared to jump in the discussion. Thank you. Go ahead, Sundiata.
I was just going to say, as to what Linda said, I read somewhere where they had actual vehicles that they had built with these plants, and that they were clothes, and that they were lots of products that were used with the plant outside of people smoking it, that many artificial companies like DuPont fought against and tried to help with the whole thing of demonizing the plant so that it could not be used. Matter of fact, I don't know if it's a fact. Somebody said, I read somewhere that the Constitution is written on the paper. Now, I could be mistaken, but if it lasted over 200 years, then it's pretty durable, huh?
Right. I see some people are taking themselves off mute, so just jump right in. And Dennis, are you out there? Let's hear from Dennis. Okay, Larry, go ahead.
You asking me to speak?
Yeah, go ahead, Larry. Yes.
Okay, well, I have made a bunch of notes, and I'll try to make it brief. I would like to look at the larger picture. I would like to remind everybody that the war on drugs and the whole crack business that emanated from it came from anti-imperialism. It came from imperialism versus anti-imperialism. The source of the crack was about the guns for drug trade, and also the battle against international communism in Nicaragua and other places in Latin America. So that's very important to the whole thing about the use of drugs and then the demonization of drugs. The second thing is that when people like Malcolm, Martin, Fred, Newton, Huey Newton started to connect the battle against mass incarceration and international racism to fight all that, the minute that they started to align themselves with the international revolutionary movement of socialism in places like Cuba and elsewhere, they were assassinated. Martin in his anti-Vietnam War speech, Fred Hampton made direct connections, Huey P. Newton made direct connections, they were killed. The next thing is that the capitalization of the thing that Linda and others have referred to directly and indirectly is that marijuana can be, if the business itself can be a source of reparation. Every single time we've had Reconstruction, we had Jim Crow as a pushback. Every time Black people found ways to upend the whole system, there was
Larry, you're lost. Okay, he'll come back. Let's keep moving. Technology.
Does Larry know he's on mute?
He's not on mute. He's just not here. So let's just keep moving. He'll come back. Trust me, Larry will come back. So Mark, I see you're off mute. Mark, can you come in and speak?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I was curious. It seems like we're talking about dancing around the issue of Corey in a number of ways, as it's limiting people's access to work in this industry. And I find Corey itself problematic. And I'm kind of wondering around sort of it represents the new Black Code. And even getting your record expunged is a limitation to that, where it doesn't shield that person from the federal government, with the FBI, any other alphabet in the federal government has access to those records, right? And the fact that people even have records for arrests where they're not even convicted of a crime, and that still limits their access in certain places and spaces. And so what can we start thinking about, and what efforts are happening? I used to, be aware of some efforts around reform the Corey system itself. And so, are we addressing the right issue? And how do we start to begin to look at reforming Corey? So thoughts around that. And it's not just for cannabis, it's for a number of things that are impacted by Corey.
Ryan, why don't you start in? Linda dropped off. I'm sure she has something. We'll wait until she comes back, but go ahead, Ryan, you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm working on this. I'll defer most of it to my fellow lawyer colleagues on the call here, but I would say, I can only speak from a cannabis specific perspective. So in terms of the Corey reform, I think that the biggest thing is that we have to really push for automatic expungement, as I talked about previously. We have to be intentional about removing these now decriminalized offenses off of people's records, because it's definitely going to be affecting them moving forward. And then in terms of looking at the Corey, and I think this is something that Linda had brought up from the specific Cannabis Control Commission perspective. I mean, if we are really trying to, have an impact on people who have been targeted by the war on drugs, then maybe we should not be looking so heavily at somebody's Corey when we're trying to approve them for an agent registration card, or for any type of hiring practices within the cannabis industry. So I think a lot of that reform probably needs to come from the Cannabis Control Commission and maybe from the state legislature. I know that there has been a lot of turnover on the Cannabis Control Commission with new commissioners who a few of them who I've spoken to are very, very interested and are prioritizing making sure that we maybe look at social equity a little bit closer and trying to figure out ways that we can impact the larger population, because obviously the system as it's currently written does not work to its best effect. So I think those are a couple of things that we should definitely be looking at moving forward.
Let me call again on Dennis. Dennis, are you out here? If you're out here, we would like to hear from you. And let's talk about Corey while we're waiting for Dennis and Linda to come back. What I heard Mark say is that it's like looking at the whole Corey whole thing. So what I think is, I'm always hesitant to look to the Cannabis Control Commission or any kind of politician or anybody like that, because for all the reasons that we already know. So I'm thinking for the people, if we want something, it's going to mean we're going to have to empower ourselves. We're going to have to collect we all have power. If we have enough of us that can manage to look at the same thing at the same time and say, this is affecting our community, we can show that there's been injustice from the beginning with the Black codes and now with this war on drugs. And we say, we change, take it off. If enough of us do that, let's let the politicians follow us. Let's not ask the politicians to lead on this because they have their limits. We are unlimited, except, you know, money. but even that, if we have enough strength, if we have enough heart, and if we want something enough, the money will come to support us to make that possible as well. So I'm going with Mark to say, whatever it is we look at and say, look, this has been happening with the original sin of this country. And now we're saying enough is enough. And not only do we want change, this is the change that we want. 1, 2, 3, get behind us. This is what we want. So I'm putting that out there. And it takes people. That's what it takes. Dwan, what do you?
So I want to talk a little bit though about the money, because I think that a lot of things that we forget, and so especially in recreational cannabis, that each city, as part of getting your HCA, that anyone who has a recreational store or retail store has agreed to that 3% of their gross sales goes to the city. No one has ever asked where that money goes, if it stays in the neighborhood and where the store is, how that's being used, what it's being used for. So there is a lot of money, because this is still new, again, a burgeoning industry, that we have not demanded where this money, what this money is going to be used for once it's collected. And we are, I know in the HCA agreements, and these are host community agreements, I'm sorry to use alphabets, host community agreements, which every recreational use, every retail store has to get from the city before they can go to the state to even apply for the license. The city has to grant you, the community has to grant you a host community, help you get the host community agreement. So I say this to say that a lot of the money flowing into cannabis, where again, we have no idea of this industry. You can't be what you can't see. We are not paying attention to the money that's being collected, the money from the state, what is happening to this cannabis. A lot of tax money, a lot of money is being made, and there's like no accounting and no plan for where we're going to put the money, especially as these stores come up in communities. And I see Dennis is on the phone, so it would really be great to talk to someone who has opened a store. I don't mean to put pressure on him, but I think that's equally important for things like what happens with quarries. I believe with voting with a quarry and with having been incarcerated should not be a barrier to anything, just like bankruptcy. I don't know, it's like at a certain point it's over and you have a clean slate. It's for prison or in the criminal justice system, something like that should exist. It's just a clean slate, and it didn't happen at a certain point for certain offenses. And I just think that's something that we'd have to push. So there is a lot of money. None of us knows what happens to it and where this money is going. It's just collected and who it's going to benefit. So I just wanted to throw.
Oops. Okay, so Dwan, you went on to mute. And Dennis seems to be having technical difficulties. He's in and out, but he's back.
He's connecting to audio.
So Dennis, if you can unmute yourself, we keep asking a lot of questions about what's going on with people who are getting in, who are able to get into the business. You have a story. Can you come and talk with us so that we can gain from your knowledge? Okay, you're on a phone. Okay, and you got. Okay, so Dennis, whenever you can, just jump right in.
Yeah, if I can just say one thing to add on to Dwan's point about some of the money, I think, because of the fact that a lot of the people that we're trying to help open up businesses don't have that access to capital. I think you may have heard of some of those horror stories of like predatory investors that come in and try to take advantage of somebody's social equity status. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that without that access to capital, and if the state government needs to get involved. They have to be able to provide grants to these applicants that are coming on so that they can have some capital to start with. And we have to find other ways. You know, I know that Sierra partners very closely through their accelerator program with small businesses to help them through each step of the way. And I think that there has to be more technical assistance, more funding that's given, so that these predatory investors don't come in and try to offer them money up front for part of an equity stake, and they're not able to pay it back at a certain point, and then they lose their business kind of stake. And I've heard a few horror stories like that, specifically here in Massachusetts. So we definitely have to make sure we get ahead of this, and we're kind of intentional about it.
Afternoon, everyone.
Okay.
Hi, Diane.
Hi, go ahead. Good to hear
How you
from
doing? I'm so sorry. I'm in a really bad area, and I'm just trying to find a good area. But good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to thank you for giving me this opportunity, and a lot of great friends on the call. A lot of great things said. I'm Dennis Benson. I'm with the Western Front. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Western Front. It's an economic empowerment company that is currently operating adult use store on Webster Avenue in Chelsea, and 2 other stores that will hopefully open up in Cambridge in the coming year. And I just wanted to address a couple of issues, I guess, that have been brought up on the call, because there's so many really important issues that have been brought up. The first thing is that I'm involved in the cannabis industry right now, but I've also practiced law for quite some time, and I'm a restaurant nightclub operator in Cambridge. And from the business perspective, I will say this, that, a lot of these issues around equity that have been raised on this call are issues that we deal with on a daily basis, and are not going to go anywhere anytime soon. We are constantly finding ourselves in a position where we have to fight for justice, we have to fight for equity, we have to fight for capital, and this is just the reality. And I'm one of those folks, and many of us that work with the Western Front, are in a position where we can continue to try to break a lot of these barriers that we have discussed. And so one of those, barriers is obviously the barrier that has to do with access to capital. And I will say that, we're part of the accelerator program with Sarah, and, Dwan has been wonderful, and the company has been great in being basically a big brother to us and giving us a lot of, the consultant services that are necessary to really get across the finish line. As many of you know, about 132 economic empowerment applicants were certified a couple of years ago, and only a handful of us have been able to open. And the reason for that is obviously access to capital. And we're in a place right now where, we have a store that's open, it's generating cash, but there are enormous amounts of issues related to the cost of goods, the amount of money that you spend to access cannabis and flower and pre-rolls to stock your shelves. Generally, it's over 50% cost of goods sold. You're paying an enormous amount of money in taxes. So what you're left with is very little. And so, part of the conversation that we need to have moving forward is how we make cannabis more affordable to minorities currently in the business, but also trying to get into the business. Because we often hear a lot about, this idea of social equity. But I think that we need to talk more about the importance of economic equity, because if we're really serious about creating Black and Latino wealth in our community, we've got to understand that there are major barriers to doing that. And, one of the inherent inequities, for example, of the cannabis business for those companies that are up and running right now that are minority is, being able to, let's say, transfer or sell the shares of investors that are minority investors in a particular cannabis company. So, for example, you have to maintain 51% minority majority control of your company. So what that means is that the white investors that are involved in your company can sell their shares to whomever they want. However, the Black and Latino investors cannot do that because it is difficult to find individuals in a minority community that have the amounts of money that it would take to acquire a cannabis company. And so that is an issue that eventually must come up before the commission, because if we're serious about creating, Black and Latino wealth, you have to allow us to transfer our ownership interests to an entity or individuals that can actually, give us the amount of money and give us the return that we deserve, because it's been a really long process. The second piece I just want to quickly address is that, I conducted over 100 interviews for employees for the Western Front. Currently, our employment force is nearly 100% people of color. Our general manager is a Latina female Navy veteran. Our assistant general manager is African-American from Dorchester. About 75% of our employees come from disproportionately impacted communities. And as I was conducting these interviews, one of the 6 criteria for qualifying as an economic empowerment applicant is that you have that you hire somebody with a record for possession of marijuana. As has been already indicated on the call, generally when you have a charge like possession of marijuana, you have other charges on your query. So that prevents you and disqualifies you from being able to work with us or work with any other company. And so that is something that needs to be looked at, because a lot of times when these policies come before the legislative body or any of its committees, it sounds good to say we want to hire people that have records, right? It sounds good. But the reality is that those individuals are difficult to find, because in most cases you have an A/B or you have some other charge. And so we need to be realistic about what we're able to accomplish with regard to hiring people that have records. But more importantly, Diane has mentioned about us coming together and empowering ourselves. Well, we've got to make sure that we're part of the shaping of a lot of these policies before they get implemented and promulgated and enacted. And so the way that we do that is that, we've got to stop being reactive about things and try to be more proactive about shaping these policies. So, there's a lot that can be said about this, but, I think that this is great that we're having this conversation, and that, again, I just want to, underscore the importance that we really need to talk more about economic justice, economic equity, and less about, this idea that, social equity is going to get us to where we need to get to.
Good point, Dennis. And Dennis, let me say what's up to you. I haven't spoken to you probably over 20-something years. Say what's up to your brother, Richie.
Will, it's great to see everyone on the call.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And Dennis was actually knew a lot of the people from the community in Cambridge who, a long time ago would have been dispensary owners if things were different. You know what I mean? And so a lot of us have those memories of those people that we knew that grew up and were pretty much businessmen or women, and they were looked down upon. And now today things are totally different, and there's a whole nother paradigm behind it. And it's funny how the places get traded so often.
Thank you. Let me just point out that here we're kind of sorting out, there's a lot of energy going to 2 different things. One is this issue of this whole Corey thing. And that's what Dennis just said, to be involved in shaping of the policy before it suddenly comes out. I mean, there's a lot to be involved with all the criminal justice system. But if we just carve out one thing, the issues around the Corey, especially for cannabis, and Jordana put in the chat that why would we think that we're why everything is working exactly the way that it's intended. So let's not think that there's a real intention for anybody, for Black people, for people of color to get involved. There isn't. Let's not fool ourselves. And then the other thing that Dennis just said and other people are talking about, so we got Corey over there. The other thing is economic empowerment. People can't afford to get involved, can't afford to do anything but like keep working day to day, and it has nothing to do with your awareness or what you'd like to do. It's where we're situated in the money. So it's not just social equity, but economic.
I just want to say this, and I think this is important. You guys have legislators who are creating policy around issues that they know nothing about. You have people creating regulations who've never created and built businesses themselves. And so, you know, that a lot of it has to do with us as individuals and who we're electing to represent us in these spaces. You cannot have people who've never created a company, run a business, done angel financing, looked for investors, been an investor, run a company from the ground up, then elect them into office and think they're going to understand how to shape policy and regulations that will make your enterprise successful. They cannot. And it's the same thing that I'm seeing with the Corey. You have a bunch of legislators. Everyone is taking, you know, they want their name on the bill and they want to toot their horn that they created and shaped criminal justice, but they themselves have never gone through the criminal justice system. They know nothing about the policies that they are putting in place. And so what it does is it brings you back to the Brown v. Board of Education, separate but equal. You're creating things that on the surface, on the face, seem like they make sense. And so the average person looking at the policy says, this is great. We're doing something to remedy, to right the wrong that we created. But in fact, it has a different impact. And so the question then is, you know, everything, politics is local, politics touches all of us. So the question then is, how do we make sure that we're getting in place the right people to sit at the table, to have the conversations that need to be had, so that we can then make sure that when their policies are applied in the real world, right? Not at the state house, but in the real world, it works. They intended to expunge the record. They intended for people who had been impacted by cannabis to be able to have successful, gainful employment. What they did, but what they did though, is they put in a provision to make people feel comfortable, people feel safe. So when you start to do things with a broad stroke, only nonviolent offenses, right? That hurts people because you don't understand what that means. Someone coming into me that I'm arraigning, that is being charged with possession of a narcotic, with an assault and battery on a police officer. If the assault and battery was that they resisted arrest and they pushed the police officer off of them, or they refused to be handcuffed, that to me is not violent. I doubt my officer was afraid for his life in that moment, right? So that is an offense, even though it carries with it a felony. It should be expunged at the same time the possession charge was expunged. And to know that, you need the manpower to review the underlying offenses. And what they're doing is they're trying to make it easy, right? Oh, it's violent, we're out. And it keeps all the legislators safe, because these are subjective tests. These are people. And as a prosecutor sitting there, I don't want anyone to get hurt under my watch. And so all those legislators are sitting there playing it safe, saying, okay, well, we'll agree to nonviolent, but anyone with violent, we don't want to touch. And that is not the way to do criminal justice reform. Every person's life has to be evaluated on a case-by-case individual basis to make a determination whether or not that person is, you know, should and is deserving of having that full record expunged. And that's the approach someone needs to start to take.
So
That makes a lot of sense. And so something that I was wondering is, because the main sort of concerns that we're bringing up here in regards to, you know, the bars to entry to the cannabis industry are the legal aspects like that in regards to having violent crime, which, you know, resisting arrest technically falls under, like you just described, as well as the main economic barrier to access, which is the lack of capital. But one thing that I was personally curious about was the sort of range of capital that's needed to get in on this industry to that regard.
So I don't know if Dennis wants to jump in on the amount.
I think he might have disconnected.
I see him, he's still on.
Roughly, it's about 2 million.
Right. It would be for a retail store, and this would be if you had maybe 1,500 square feet in the store. it would be about 2 million. What that would pay for is first your licensing, what it would take for licensing, build out, you have to hire employees, and you have to stock the store
Okay.
to even get started, right?
No,
And
no wonder.
So added to that,
Okay.
so added to that 2 million, what Dennis shared, I think part of what I heard what Dennis shared was in terms of cost associated with and profit associated with and taxes, etc. That, you know, initially this is not going to be incredibly lucrative.
well,
And so at what point with that investment are you actually making profit?
so
At what point are you becoming profitable?
So typically, and this is like a small retail store is what we're talking about. And I'm saying like 1,500 square feet or so. So what you're talking about is if you were to gross, and I've just seen this is quick and dirty. If you were to gross, let's say $12 million, it's going to split up in thirds. So what you're going to end up doing is you may end up, and this is the partnership, is with 4 million. And that's what you're going to have. That's what you're going to make. After you pay taxes, you pay for your costs, your operations, that kind of thing. That's what you'll end up with 4 million. So if you are grossing like about $12 million, you're going to end up with 4 million. Now that is to decide if you're putting it back in the business, what are you going to do? It's expensive. So
take them one step back though, Dwan, because what Dennis is talking about is the regulations as it applies to equity applicants, where 51% has to be minority, and the classification of minority is important.
Right. So
minority is Black or Hispanic only.
Exactly. And so when you form, so typically cannabis companies are LLCs, and usually it may be 3 of us deciding we're going to have a cannabis company, and we get together and let's say we're trying to, in the way Dennis was explaining it, 51, if you're an economic empowerment applicant, you are certified by the state, 51% of the ownership is with someone of color, and it has to remain with someone of color. I'm just going to throw this in there. One of the options is to not become an economic empowerment applicant, but that you're going to take your knowledge, and I'm going to be a 1/3 owner in that business with my knowledge, with what I have, but I'm not necessarily looking. It could be, I'm not going to look for that status. So then if
what's the benefit of that status?
The benefit you get expedited, review from the CCC. So people wait, and I am not joking, 2 or 3 years. It kicks you up front. So you get in front of Sarah Naturals. You're in front of Sarah Naturals just because you're an economic empowerment applicant. But that's
in certain communities, Ron, can you tell them certain communities can be more restrictive, like Somerville, where you get to go first?
Right. And Somerville actually defines social equity and economic empowerment a little differently for the Somerville community, in that if you're a resident of Somerville, they will do an expedited host community agreement review, and you go to the front of the line. So you have all of these people vying for a limited number of licenses, and it's who gets reviewed first. And the review has been taking a couple of years. Hopefully that would speed up. But the difference is, and what Dennis is explaining, when I was saying that $4 million that you're left with, you would just say if your 51% ownership is half of the 4 million, so it's a little over $2 million would go to that person. If you were just going to disperse, if you were just going to give the owners capital. So, Dennis, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I just wanted to bring up a couple other points that came to mind. So, again, in terms of looking at equity and economic equity and all of this, another area that is really critical is that as more companies come to market, right, and more companies that are not minority owned, simply because it's just expensive, as we've already talked. For example, we started our process about 3.5 years ago. We've already invested about $4 million in the company. Most of that money came from Black and brown folks that have had their money tied up for about 3 years. That's an economic reality. They're probably not going to see any return on their investment during the course of the next year or two because of the cost involved in operating a store or growing a company. And so where they would see a return, again, is in the sale of the company to some entity or individuals that are, minority controlled and owned. So, that's a reality. But then the other piece is that acquiring or finding cannabis product, we're finding that it's incredibly difficult to purchase flower, to purchase pre-rolls, or any products that are cannabis related, because a lot of the cultivators just don't have enough supply. And so one of the ways that companies are going to be squeezed out of, particularly minority companies, squeezed out of the marketplace, because many of us are not, none of us are cultivators at the moment that are going to market. Because if, 3 or 4 years ago, when the marketplace opened up in Massachusetts, you had to be vertically integrated, meaning that you had to have a grow, you had to have a store in order to get involved in medical. And that was part of the inequitable setup of the system here in Massachusetts, because they really should have done a 1-to-1 back 4 or 5 years ago, right? But now we're in a position where you have all these major companies operating in Massachusetts, and they can really choose who they want to sell to, right? So they control the marketplace in that way. And that's why it was important for us to partner up with someone like Sarah that prioritized us in terms of getting us enough product in the very beginning back in November when we opened our doors, so that we can pass our final inspections, but more importantly, we could have stock to actually sell the community and others that were coming to our store. So that is something that needs to be really looked at, because, a lot of these companies should almost be forced to have to sell to minority companies. And the second, piece here is that, we, I gotta underscore this, that we have got to figure out a way to allow minorities to transition out of cannabis and not have to keep their money in the industry for a really long time. And I see this, but the analogy that I would use is that, when we create affordable housing in our communities, we create what we call these limited equity co-ops. And limited equity co-ops are great because they give us access to home ownership. But in the end, if you spend 20 years living in that unit and you go to sell that unit, you're not going to be able to maximize profit on the sale of that unit, right? So that is like an inherent inequity in the system, because white folks can go ahead and get as much money as they want for their real estate, but Black folks cannot. And it's the same exact thing happening in cannabis at the moment. My investors want to become wealthy like any other investor, but at the moment, we're handcuffed. And I think that is something that the commission really has to take a strong look at, because that's a major inherent inequity in cannabis. And that's not a social inequity, that's an economic inequity.
To build on that, Dennis, with our last show where we talked about reparation, not reparation, but Juneteenth. I'm sorry, was Larry talking?
Not yet.
Okay, I was just going to say, and I'll make it quick, that on our Juneteenth presentation, Jordana and Diane and Lane all talked about how the real estate was done in almost the exact same manner. When one group of people was given a chance to get in at an early start and get that thing that would eventually be worth a lot of money, we were held back and we were given no opportunities or very unequal opportunity in that same field. So it sounds like the same narrative going on in this industry as well. And when do we start to break these narratives? I hear we're talking about how to do it, but I'm seeing so many similarities.
Yeah, I was going to say, I apparently what I said before was cut off. But I was going to say, first of all, I've learned an enormous amount from Linda, from the others. I can't think of their names right now, that I needed to understand, especially about the machinations of all of this. But every time, what I was going to do was to try to do the larger context, which is every single time there's been Black liberation, as Reconstruction following slavery, there was Jim Crow. There was a counter-revolution, and every time there was a counter-revolution, there was another revolution, the Civil Rights Movement, and there was mass incarceration. This industry has the potential, and Dennis is reminding us how difficult it is, for reparation, for the first time, a real serious reparation to the underserved, to the disadvantaged, and so forth. And we already see how difficult that is to make enacted. And I would offer that's white supremacy to the max happening right there. They're making that, and we've got to remember that, right? You know, not to make that overwhelm us, but to make sure we understand what the opposition is all about. You know, one last little small comment. Donnie family moves into Washington Elms. Washington Elms was redlined. You know, it was public housing. Newtown Court, by federal act, was made for white people only, and Newtown Court was made for Black families only in its original service. Richard Rothstein's book about the whole history of the federal government and housing is a perfect example of what we're talking about. So it looks like there's Black liberation and there's Black housing and affordable housing, but in the long run, it's not. And I keep making us try to be as aware as we can of all the impediments to reparations with this industry, to getting into the industry, and all of the things to expunge and all the complications. I submit that's not accidental.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of examples of what's taking place within Massachusetts that if folks are really serious, we could look at in a meaningful way, which would then trickle down to the cannabis industry. So for example, you know, the legislature passes an act called 40B, and what 40B was designed to do is make sure that housing is affordable throughout the state in all communities. And why would that be important? Well, it's important that towns and communities comply with 40B because certain towns and communities have access to great, rich educational experiences and public school systems for children. So I can use as an example the town of Milton, which has all brand new schools, starting with the elementary all the way up, and offers full care for preschool to through high school. But they're, at 50% compliance. But even though they're at 50% compliance, construction continues. But those builders do not have to necessarily adhere to the statutory mandatory minimum because they can opt out or buy the right out of that requirement. And so then if you toggle that and you look at programs that were designed to build equity within communities of color so that they could participate in certain spaces, like Dennis trying to participate in the cannabis space, with respect to housing, you look at the changes that D&D put in place. For example, it used to be a gift that you would go and apply for a house, and if you didn't have enough money, they would gift you a certain amount of money, and that money would then be forgiven. But if you fast forward, as the numbers started to tick up of minority families participating in those programs are no longer gifts. Those programs now have to be repaid dollar for dollar. Also, the restrictions, as minority families started to hold those affordable houses and the covenants started to expire, 25-year covenants, 30-year covenants. Now you look at those covenants and those covenants are extended out to 50 years. And so we're not in Italy, people. We're not building vineyards where we need olive trees and grapes to mature in our fields to mature, and we pass that inheritance down to our children. This is the United States. So we got to figure out how we're talking about equity and economic opportunity, but on the back end, cutting people off at the knees from ever being able to realize that dream.
If I can say very quickly, because I see we're getting toward the end of time, and I want to thank Linda. That's actually how we met, was working in the housing on affordable housing. But one of the things I think is important, and to me where there is a ray of hope, is, as Dennis mentioned, and Sierra Naturals was one of these companies that we started out as a vertically integrated medical company. And the way that worked was the state actually gave the licenses and the cities kind of came in on the back end, and they were kind of forced to acknowledge that who actually got licenses. And it wasn't as transparent and open on how those licenses were given out. But it's changed a little bit in the recreational, and I've seen in a few cities in Massachusetts, Boston being one, is what they've done is, in order for you to get into the business, Boston has decided, for example, who they're going to get licenses on, what they're going to hold you accountable for. And their biggest thing is what your impact on the community and disproportionately impacted communities, how many people that you've hired that have had records. They are looking at the diversity of your business. They made Sierra Naturals come right up and show us your numbers, and they're looking for improvement. So Boston front-ended and kind of made your efficiency in running the business less valuable on how you could get a license. Unfortunately, a lot of folks had gotten licenses before Boston actually put out their rules in August. So I think one of the things, and I think this goes to what Linda was saying earlier, is paying attention to who you're electing, asking questions about, like right now, we have a mayoral election in Somerville, we have a mayoral election in Boston, new city councils. Ask them about this cannabis money and who's getting the licenses and how, and if there are ways, as Linda mentioned, if there are ways that we can begin to change the rules. One of the things I'm most interested in, I think Pharaoh kind of went there a little bit with Linda, is what can we do on a parallel track? If I'm first making sure where is the money going, who is getting a license, and will they revoke it? So for example, if you gave me a license because I'm going to have a certain amount of people of color working for me, and I told you all these great stories, and I show up the following year and have done nothing, what are you going to do, city? Are you going to stop me? What do you do for me being a big company? So it's like really holding our feet to the fire. The second thing is going to what Linda mentioned, is what can we do about the quarries? What could we do collectively as a group? And Diane mentioned this, of beginning to get to the point where it doesn't matter. A quarry shouldn't matter if you're going into cannabis. And if the expungement and all that's great, but at a certain point it shouldn't matter at all. You have a quarry. They tell you have to hire people with quarries. As Dennis explained, that's really difficult because you can't. So I just want to say, going forward, I have some hope in the way some cities have been handling who gets the licenses. And I think that's where we can have a lot of impact. And you're at the meetings, like those meetings are posted, and it is holding folks accountable and raising your hand about why someone's getting a license and making sure that they are living up, and that we will. And I will tell you this from Sierra Naturals, one of the reasons our programs look the way they do is because Sierra Naturals, having Linda, having me, has decided that, okay, we're going to just actually really do this. A lot of companies may or may not, but force companies, like, you're going to actually do this, and we're going to come back and look. City of Boston was really clear. We're coming back in a year. We're going to see what you've done with diversity at your plants and that sort of thing. Just want to throw this out here.
This is Dennis here. Just one follow-up point on that, Dwan, is that several months ago when I was reviewing the statistics for the hiring of bud tenders and others in the cannabis industry across Massachusetts, outside of those of us that are EEAs, I found that well over 70% of the employees for many of these companies were white. And so as you think about how do we shape policy, all of these companies have to come before local boards, and all these companies have to come before the CCC. Again, just mentioning real inequities here, one of the things that we just recently confronted over the last year is that we went through an incredibly burdensome and costly vetting process with the Cannabis Control Commission, where we basically had to prove that we were Black. And it was one of the most exhausting and one of the most offensive experiences that I've ever had in my entire life being involved in any economic ventures. And that is something, again, that has to do with the inherent inequities of the cannabis market, because you have these white operators in the state of Massachusetts that are allowed to hire more than 70% people that are white, do not have the burdens on their backs that we have as economic empowerment applicants, where we have to hire, within a criteria of, 6 different areas that are not easy to fill, right? One of those criteria, for example, is that you have to hire 51% from neighborhoods that are disproportionately impacted. So when this was decided, think about this. You could be living on a street in Roxbury, and one person on one side of the street qualifies as living in a disproportionately impacted community, but the person on the other side does not, because they use these census tracts that don't really point out the major inequities of the neighborhoods that we live in. Another example is that Cambridge, for example, my neighborhood is the Port. The Port had high incidence of the criminalization of young men of color, and continues to do that to this day. Just in the past week, we've had like 4 shootings, right? Yet we didn't make the list for a neighborhood that's disproportionately impacted. So if I hire somebody from my neighborhood to work, for example, in the store in Cambridge, they don't count as credit towards us hiring people from 51% neighborhoods that are disproportionately impacted. So again, that is like creating more hurdles and more obstacles for companies like ours. And there's no pressure on these white companies that are operating in Massachusetts to hire folks, right? So they're like, they're like being left off the hook, yet we continue to be on the hook while we're doing the real work that needs to be done to create equity in Massachusetts.
But
right?
Dennis, it's organizations like the ACLU and the NAACP that have to challenge the differences in the policies to say that it has it's disproportionate. It has it gives the feeling of it being racially charged, and it feels like it's intended to be hurtful to the minority business owner. But someone has to challenge that. They have to say, look, on its face, it doesn't work. And it's not fair. And this is why it's not fair. And look to people like you who are in the industry trying to comply, working hard to comply, but struggling to do so, to say, we've tried it. We've spent a tremendous amount of money. It's discriminatory on its face. It doesn't work. You got to fix it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that part of the problem that we're seeing this shift in politics, and you've brought it up, Linda, is that we've got to dig deeper than just saying there's not enough of us in the business. We already know that. There's not enough of us, for example, in Cambridge, right? There are 3 liquor license holders that are people of color, right? So everywhere we look in every single industry, we're behind. Right. And and those of us that are on this call are pioneers, of people that are trying to break, ceilings and barriers, whether we're women, whether we're men of color, whatever you have. So I think that we've got to go beyond the mentioning in our political circles and in the legislature that, okay, we need to do something about the inequity. Yes, we know that, but you have to go a lot deeper than that. You've got to talk to the business owners to understand what are the issues that they're dealing with on a daily basis that are not issues that are really, progressive, right? Or problems that are really, that can be resolved, but not through like basic progressive policies that sound good because we feel like we want to be woke, right? This is a really major issue that we're dealing with right now. And it's something that it's troubling because we're shooting ourselves in the foot. I mean, we just applauded the work that someone was on, and I'm not going to mention a name, but one of the commissioners that just recently left, okay, created some of the most restrictive so-called progressive policies that could have been created that are supposed to help economic empowerment applicants, but in turn created more hurdles and more obstacles for us. And the issue really was this, guys. The issue was that they want to prevent companies like ours from being used by white companies or being used as fronts. That in itself is offensive to me, because that says that me as a person, I don't have the capacity to say to a white company, you're not going to use me. You're not going to take advantage of me. That I'm not competent enough, I'm not intelligent enough to fend off these white companies that want to come in and consume us, right? We can do that on our own. What we need is not someone, babying us or, treating us like we're dumb. What we need is money. That is what we need. And we don't need $200,000 and $300,000. We need millions of dollars. And so what they should have done as they were creating these rules is say, look, if you want to be a white company and you want to operate in Massachusetts, you need to take a significant sum of money and you need to invest it in Black companies that are trying to enter the cannabis industry. And if you don't do that, you're not going to play ball in Massachusetts. It's that simple. That's how you create real economic equity. And again, we've got to move away from this idea of social equity, because I'm not interested in sitting at a table with white folks. What I'm interested in seeing is making sure that I can get the money necessary so that I can hire 100 individuals of color to work for my company. But that takes capital, guys. It takes money. And, we can sit around and talk about all the woke policies of the world. But the reality is that without the capital and without, being able to, level the playing field in terms of allowing white companies to sit next to us and us being treated just as equal as them in terms of being able to enter cultivation or enter the industry, we're not going to really go anywhere. We're going to continue to spin our wheels. And by the time the next 2 years come around, there are going to be hundreds of companies operating in Massachusetts. The market is going to be saturated, and the opportunity to create wealth within the community of color is going to be completely gone.
Let me just say that, we're like rapidly passing the time. Dennis, you have hit the nail right on the head. And I see Sundiata shaking his head because we talk about this all the time. We're talking millions, billions. We need a big infusion of money. So I'm going to offer, we at the Racial Justice Collaborative, our clearinghouse, we can work with people. We don't have any limits. We can do anything. And so if you wanna, if we wanna get together and start to spread out, and we have all kinds of platforms, we can do that. And Jordana is now on the screen, and she's offering, the Racial Justice Collaborative is offering in August, our next workshop is on the wealth that was built on slavery. So we're looking at this wealth, and then in November we're doing a reparations. We're going to do a demand for reparations. So let's all start to move to work together and do what we need to do to make a difference in this Corey issue and the economic justice. So is there anybody else that would like to say a few words?
Diane, I just wanted to say to Linda and Dennis that a huge issue, and it's just been on my mind, this 51% ownership by Black people or white people, or people of color, for this economic empowerment piece, is like, who's making the decision? It reminds me of the one drop rule. It reminds me of the Department of the Interior, where they're deciding who's indigenous and who isn't. And then also, of course, white people are going to try and take advantage to put themselves across as people of color. It's just, to me, it's the most fundamental and brutal part of this, is some system is deciding who is Black, who's of color. And then Linda brought up, of course, other people who've been brutalized by the system are not involved. But Linda, I guess I guess
yeah. Jordana, one of the activists in Boston, the way they described it to me, when they said I wasn't Black.
How are you? Do we need me to take the umbrella?
When she said I wasn't Black, she said the way she decided that I wasn't Black, because my father is African American and my mother is a Korean immigrant, is that I wasn't born of a Black vagina.
Wow,
that was analysis. So I said, well, I'm from Texas, and they said if I had a drop of Black in me, I was Black.
Right,
so,
right.
And so everybody, it's self-serving how they want to classify you in terms of race and ethnicity.
I might add.
That's white supremacy.
Thank you. That blew me away right there. Jesus.
So one of the things, and I think when Dennis was talking about like the programs for housing, and I'm a huge advocate against deed restrictions for the very reason that it's almost, there's an asterisk. And so one of the things I think we want to look toward is, I'm for not having those. I think you need, like, for example, if you have a program like this economic empowerment, it gets me in and then it ends. Once I'm in, then I get to be like everybody else in the industry. Similarly with housing, that just gets me to the door. Once I get my mortgage, I'm like everyone else. I don't have a 50-year covenant on my property that who you dictate to who I can sell. And you're going to come in and inspect my house. What's the difference between that and living in public housing? I have a mortgage. What is the difference? 20 years after I've paid the mortgage off, you can still regulate what's happening in that house because I have a covenant with the city. So one of the things with the program, and I think, again, getting back to this kind of funnel thing that we're looking at and the economic empowerment of people, is that there is a sweat equity component that I can enter into with anybody. I don't want special treatment. I'm going to take the knowledge or the skills I have. I'm going to be a 1/4 owner of this business, and other folks will come in, and we're going to go on. It's getting people of color to be able to have an equity interest. Frankly, that I don't have to go and sell. I want to be an equity interest because I'm going to help you get the license. Dennis can tell you that is the hardest part about this, is actually getting your hands on that license. And people of color, because of the way the legislation is written, that become helpful in having the skills and to be part of the team. So it's using that, but I'm going to be an equity owner. That to me is the holy grail. That is where you want to be headed. I mean, we can work and do all of the other things, but that is where the generational wealth is that even if it's 5% of a cannabis company that lasts for 10 years or what have you. It's how we come up with those models. And I think, like all of this other stuff, I don't know how you get from under it. It's just, to me, coming up with a new model that allows you to be in the business, to be a partner. And I'm not going to apply for economic empowerment. That was my solution. I would not apply for it because of the restrictions Dennis is facing. So I can wake up one day and decide I may want to sell my business. I may want to cash out, and I can sell it to anyone and not be restricted to the business, not being able to only be able to sell to people of color. The same thing that happens with restricted covenants. You can only sell that house to other people in the same income level that you were when you bought it. And so you get none of the appreciation. So I don't know that all they do, in my opinion, I'll just throw this out there, all these programs do is keep people in the government employed to monitor the programs and the housing and all of this. It's not that helpful. So anyway, that's just my opinion, but I want to lead on a happier note. I think there is an opportunity to come up with new models, and let's look for those. Get the job, learn the skill, then become a partner in a business with people that you're bringing something to the table that the business can't run without.
Or it's like what you just said, Dwan. You get a group of people together and you make an investment. It's somebody else's business. And so you're an investor. And so then you don't have to sell, you don't have to do anything, you just put some money in.
And so you're the one that helps them, anyone at this call, you're the one that helps them get the license in front of the city. Someone has to get up and talk to the folks at the city and lobby and do all of that. If you're doing that, that is a skill they need. You live in the community, you are there, and that was what you're putting into the business for your equity ownership.
Right.
Like, I will help you do this, but I'm going to get an ownership piece of the business. It's to begin to think of it like that. So I don't have to be the huge running it. I just need to have a part of the equity ownership that's mine. That's part of it. I think we can start that small, but
it's learning. It's deciding that we're going to learn collectively. We're going to have groups of people, and each part of that group is going to learn a different aspect, and then we all come together and we know the whole thing. We don't have to do everything.
And if I can add one more thing about my company, just to say this, I have been lucky enough for a couple of folks who I've met in the company, and Linda knows this too, a couple of folks that have allowed me to learn, at their elbow. And this has been, I didn't think this would come. I'm toward the end of my career, and all of a sudden this opportunity came, and I started working with this group. And I feel, because I'm older and coming into the business, that the opportunity of being able to see what it takes, that there were equity interests in the business, and there are ways, like to be when they're setting up the business and you just happen to be there. And so I can't say enough about the opportunities that I've been given, and what I am hoping is to use this opportunity as a way to get other people of color, specifically people who have been impacted, into the cannabis business. Even as I said yesterday, if I have to shake them and say, come into it, learn the skills. There is no right way yet. It's learn it now, because you're on the front end. Think of Steve Jobs and the one that's getting the divorce now.
Bill Gates.
Gates. Yeah, he quit Harvard. He didn't go to Harvard and played with computers in his garage. And that's how Microsoft. That, to me, I'm telling you guys, that is the cannabis industry.
But Dwan and knows this, and it is the cannabis industry, but we are uniquely situated in that we work with owners who are true leaders, and they were leaders before they became into the cannabis
Cannabis
space.
industry, yes.
And so, and I think that is also what makes a difference. And that's why I really try to press people to really think about who we're getting to lead us in all spaces. The people that we work with at Sierra Natural, they were open to diversity and inclusion and creating equity in communities of color before cannabis ever came about. And one of the owners I've been working with for over 20 years in going back as far as creating free programming, because one of the things we learned very early on is young Black children, because they didn't have access to skill instruction in certain areas, whether it was music or whether it was football. If you gave them the ability to read music, they could get the scholarship at Emerson. If you gave them the ability to know the skill set, they could get the scholarship at Michigan. He was instrumental in pouring in thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years to communities of color to help us create opportunities for children. And we created those opportunities for kids for free at no cost, regardless of income bracket. As long as they wanted to participate, we created it, we made it happen. So if you have leaders like that, then you get into the cannabis space, and then it makes sense that he has someone at the helm like a Dwan Packnett, and he has companies like Dennis Benson, because he truly believes in it, and he's not in the space because it's now producing income for cannabis. He was working in these spaces years and years and years ago, and his prior companies always retained and hired people with quarries. So these are not new spaces. So we have that benefit, but then we need more people like them working in these spaces.
And I would say another thing with Sarah, we are also part of Air Wellness, and that's in other states. So if you were to get a job here and learn the industry and wanted to move to, we are in Florida, Arizona, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and I might be forgetting one, but there is the opportunity, we're union. So the opportunity to move around and learn the skills in different jobs. So there are a lot of ways to get to that equity piece, because to me, the equity piece is once you have learned the skill, you have something of value that you can then use. And it's thinking of it, that's mine, I have it, and I can then, that's what I'm going to leverage.
Well, thank you.
I have a question. Sorry. Okay, very quickly. What is the going rate for a pound of marijuana?
I don't think we sell it by the pound.
Yeah.
Where are you?
I asked the question because we spoke about, it takes about 12 million to take home 4, because everything is split in thirds. So I want to know how much I have to actually sell in order to make $12 million in a given year.
Well, Karen, I don't know this exactly, but I'm looking at Sierra Natural's website, and they're having some weekend deals. But 1 ounce, they usually sell marijuana by the ounce, not pounds. But an ounce,
actually, I said pounds, but in ounces. I'm sorry.
But that's for Route 90 Seattle soda, which I have no idea what that is. But Dwan's point about knowledge.
No.
Dwan, you're on mute.
Oh.
I want to say there are a lot of strains and types, but go on, I'm sorry.
No, so I'm just curious, how much does an ounce cost? That's my question.
Well, it depends on what you're buying. And there's more than just weed. There's a lot of different types that it comes in. There are tinctures, there are gummies, there are third-party vendors. I mean, it is a lot of products you're selling, which is what Deb was mentioning about.
Pre-rolls cost one about $35.
No, probably I would say 45 or more, like 45. Because, okay, one of the reasons is the pre-rolls in most cities, they do not want you to sell like nips or sell one. So they want you to box them in a way that it makes the price point is higher. So it discourages people from buying one joint and then coming out on the street and smoking it. So that's one of the reasons they're boxed together. So, and we just started a new, but they have maybe 4 or 5 in there, but I would say it's going to be more about around $50.
Okay, thank you very much. I was just absolutely
pre-rolls.
curious.
So
I wanted to know how, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So Karen, but if you're talking about as an investor or an owner,
None of that matters.
Yeah, Dwan's
right?
talking about the retail shop.
Right, the retail sale, right.
So,
So
yeah.
It's the wholesale. So one of the things, and I wish Dennis is here, so he should talk about how a wholesale agreement. So one of the things that happens, and one of the things you would need is a wholesale agreement on how you're going to stock the shelves. The CCC does not allow you to have more than one, like Sierra Naturals or one wholesaler have more than a third of your shelf space. Again, to stop someone being predatory is their logic for that. So what you're looking for, is usually with wholesale agreements, and one of the things that Sarah may do a little differently with economic empowerment applicants and folks that we're working with, is typically it's cash on delivery, like in any deal that you would be doing getting cannabis, it's cash on delivery. But what a lot of times, if you can get a wholesale agreement to give you terms where you will pay them, in 30, 60 days or something like that, that gives you a little time to sell and kind of pay some of the operations costs even, and then repay using an agreement. But you're going to have a wholesale agreement, and then that's how you're going to reach terms. And it's a little bit different. And that would be for flour and and the different types of products and what they're stocking. The hardest part, as Dennis mentioned, is that you can have a reliable wholesaler that actually has the product, because we're talking in the future. Will have the product when you need it. And so they're not calling you at the last minute and you can't stock your shelves. And they're not calling you at the last minute saying we don't actually have product to give you. And so right now there's a shortage as people are beginning to gear up after the pandemic and all of this. There's been a shortage, and and more things are coming online, but you have to wait for the plants to grow and for it to be processed and all of this. And there's a big lull in testing. That's a huge problem in Massachusetts. That's actually a good business, though, for folks of color to think about getting in. It's become a testing company, because before you can put it on the market, in order to make sure it has the proper levels of THC and CBD or whatever's going to be in the product, it has to be tested, and that can take over 30 days. So what you are literally waiting before you can sell it, before we can sell it wholesale, it has to be tested and before we can release it. So we may have a backup of it's being tested. So that's a huge problem as well.
So there are many, many ways to get into this business, and we'll learn more. This is why Dwan and Linda said to me, this is not a one kind of seminar topic. But I see a certain interest. There's a interest in this group we're talking to on ownership,
Right.
and so we're also, Dennis, wherever you are, you're the mentor. You are in it, and so your skills we're gonna call on you, along with Dwan and other people. But
I want to thank Dwan, because I found your knowledge on the subject to be quite informational to me as a business owner in general. And I was like, like I wrote all these questions down, and one question got answered to 10 of my questions. So it just kept spilling out. So thank you. And Dennis, you were very informative as well, because you're in the stick of it. So all of that was helpful with my questions and my curiosity about the product. And I would definitely like to hear more about it. So thank you, Diane. Thank you, Diane.
And I would just want to say, if there's a way, because this is exactly the part of you can't be what you can't see. You can't be an owner if you don't know that this exists and how it works and the questions that you're like, and I don't know, Diane, I'll throw this back to you, as how this conversation, because this is exactly what I feel our mission is, I think with Linda and I, is to make sure with Ryan that we are out here letting folks know. And so you're asking the kind of questions and figuring out, there might be a way that you figure out, I could go into this and I could be a part of it, and it's something I'm interested in. So I look forward to that. This is exactly what we're trying to do, and I think is much needed, not only here at Somerville, Boston, the greater Boston area. We need to be all over it, and I mean over the next year, to get people involved in this.
I do have one question. I'm so sorry.
Yes.
If I don't get it out, I will forget. So what, while we have, if you own a store, like Dennis owns a storefront, and you have to hire people based on the quarry, and that's a prerequisite. What's the chances of the state or the federal government coming in and, just kind of raiding, and, you're hiring people that, like we're talking about, were incarcerated for, either holding possession and or selling the product before it became legal. What is the chances that they're just going to walk through your store every 5 minutes and disrupt your business?
Well,
I've got that question.
Well, I'll let Ryan talk about the likelihood of you actually getting the job in the store, so you won't be there. The CCC does surprise inspections. That's just part of it. And a lot of the cities are going to want to do inspections, not so much surprise, but the CCC at any time will come in and they're going to be looking for badges, and you can get shut down if you are not following the rules. So that is what makes the knowledge you have in one of these stores so valuable, the fact that you know that, and if you don't know the rules and where everything has to be, and they could come in at any point. So that's part of this. So it's regulated, and at any point they can come in on any day.
Gotcha.
And say we're doing an inspection. We want to see.
Because I figured there was a way for them to, here it is, you start your flourishing business, and the thumb is still on top of your head to be able to shut you down, because they're telling you pretty much who you can hire, and then they can close you down. Like, that's a lot of control. That's out of your hand.
And it's so regulated. Now, hopefully, once they see that this is no different than a liquor store, but once they see that, some of this will die down. I mean, they even have, if you've been in a cannabis store, they even have like trap rooms, like you have to get out. You have to go into a space, then the door has to close before you can then press a button for the other door to close. It is seriously that guarded. It's going to be that way. It'll be a few years before it changes, but it really is that regulated. Another thing that adds to the expense, because this is security that you're going to need, your cameras, all of that is also, this is why it's so expensive to operate. But I would love to continue this conversation. I am excited to be here with you, because this is the exact kind of conversation that has to be out there, where we're talking about it and thinking about it, and this is how a change will come and people will get more interested. And so Karen, I will be looking.
Oh, wonderful. And the last thing I wanted to ask about, I think one of the biggest risks of revenue loss will be your employees who are utilizing, eating, and using your product. That is also a huge problem, I would think.
Not at all.
Oh,
because
really?
Again, a highly regulated seed to sale, they know where every piece of cannabis is going. There is a inventory. That's what I'm saying. You learn the inventory system, everything. You have a scale that you're weighing nothing. They know where, and if there's not a reconciliation, no one goes home. You have to reconcile cannabis and your sales. There is not a way that that's going to happen, that an employee's walking out with cannabis.
So there's a munchie check and a pupil check. I'm kidding.
Well,
I'm kidding.
First, even if you had your own and were using it, you probably are not going to be working as fast as you probably need to work. Just saying. But the fact of the matter is, and this is what makes this such a great industry to start, the inventory system is literally seed to sale. There is a label from the time it leaves the plant till you sell it. So they would know if I have cannabis and I have a patient card, if I have cannabis at my house, you're going to know where I got it from and exactly what plant and where it came from. That is how the state system is regulated. So if you have some, yes.
No, I was just going to say, well, thank you. I really appreciate everyone in this conversation. And it's interesting to sort of get people to think about a place, a space, and this industry. And the thing that I'm leaving with, whether it's testing, whether it's whatever element, retail, growing, there's an enormous amount of investment, not just knowledge of that area, but also investment in terms of capital in order to get into it. And so looking forward to having further conversations about like, how do you access that capital? Because that has been, you know, historically the restriction, intentional restriction, along with other regulatory restrictions that sort of stop people from getting into particular industries to begin with.
I agree.
So looking forward to sort of having those conversations on how do we, to Dennis' point, it's really about the economics of it, but how do we get past those things?
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
The very fact that we went over 30 minutes. So I'm gonna, it's not a problem. That shows that people are interested and people are still here too, listening. So I'm gonna offer on behalf of the Racial Justice Collaborative, we are racial justice. We do racial justice. This is racial justice right now. So if there's any way that we can be at the center of organizing things for groups, for people, different groups. I put in the Racial Justice Collaborative over there, racialjusticecollaborative.com, or you can just, you know, everybody knows me, so just send me an email. And Frank, are you still here? Frank,
I'm still here,
Can you tell us the next events?
Well, you mentioned one. We have one August. Oh, let me pull it up. The tentatively titled Northern Wealth from Slavery, August 28th. And then we have the Whiteness Strategies, September 11th. And then the final one for the year is Reparations, the Demand. It's going to be our fall race retreat scheduled for November 6th. So that's the last three we have coming up for this year.
And so what we're going to do by the time we get to November, reparations, see everything, we're talking about all kinds of ways that injustice calls for reparations. So, and as Dennis has said, and as Dwan has said, you need $2 million just to get into the business. So, you know, let's find when we do have reparations, it's got to be substantial. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. If we want to do more of anything, let us know. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Diane. You're awesome.
Susie, thank you. Thank you, Karen.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for your story, Sundiata. Thanks for your talk, Pharaoh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Diane.
you, everyone.
Thank you,